Hello, my fellow society members of the Grimm Society, and welcome to another video. Today we'll be doing a new series called Reading with Mr. Grimm. The first book we will be reading in this series is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. Check out the series. And I will be reading 2 chapters every video of this book. Of course, there'll be other books. I have all 7 of these books. So, we're going to be here for a fucking while. So, I'll take a seat in my trusty chair. You'll only see the head of me. And you'll just see... My fucking wall looks weird. But as you can see, I have a light blinding me. A nice little picture of Noah's Ark. That's about all you can see. And the bed frame of my bed with a... Okay, this is what I'm doing for this time. Okay, let's start. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. Also, I did a little thing before this, and then I decided I'm only going to read 2 chapters. So, because it was taking way too fucking long. But, here we go. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved with anything strange or mysterious, because they didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley, who was thin and blonde, had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think that they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister, because her sister was her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dudley woke up on the dull gray Tuesday our story starts, there was nothing about the cloudy sky to suggest that anything strange and mysterious things should be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large tawny owl flutter past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal off the walls. "Little tyke," chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was on the corner of a street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing at the corner of Piprit Drive. But there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. As Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Piprit Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove toward town, he thought of nothing except the large order of drills he had been hoping to get that day. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people walking about. People in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes. The get-ups you saw in young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on the huddle of those weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be older than he was, and he was wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him. But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in Grunning's parking lot, his mind back on the drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owl swooping past in broad daylight. Although down the street, God fucking damn it, though people down on the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as owl. I wonder how much battery I have left on this thing. Owl, even at nighttime. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal, owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the bakery. Crap. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the bakers. I'm fucking terrible at reading at some points. Sometimes I'll just fucking make mistakes that aren't very big if you ask me. But I'll still get fucking pissed at it. Okay, let's see, where was I? He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. This bunch were whispering excitedly, too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. And was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in his bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. The Potters, that's right. That's what I heard. Yes, the son Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whisperers as if he wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at his secretary not to disturb him, seized his telephone, and had almost finished dialing his home number when he claimed to his mind. He put a receiver back down and stroked his mustache, thinking, no, he was being stupid. Potter wasn't such an unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his nephew was called Harry. He'd never even seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. There's no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got so upset of any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her. If he'd ever have a sister like that. But all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon, and when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still worried that he walked straight into someone just outside. He was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. Sorry, he grunted as the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized that the man was wearing a violet cloak. He didn't seem at all upset at almost being knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile and said it in a squeaky voice that made a passerby stare. Don't be sorry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who is on at last. Even muggles like yourself should be celebrating this happy day. And the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Mr. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He had also thought that he had been called a muggle, whatever that was. He was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off for home, hoping he was imagining things, which he had never hoped for, because he didn't approve of imagination. As he pulled into the driveway at number 4, the first thing he saw, and didn't improve his mind, was the tabby cat he'd spotted that morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same markings around its eyes. "Shoo!" said Mr. Dursley loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dursley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Mrs. Dursley had a nice normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. Nextdoor's problems with her daughter, and how Dudley had learned a new word. Won't. Dudley's a bitch. Mrs. Dursley tried to act normally when Dudley had been put... Mr. Dursley had... Fuck. I'm terrible at reading. Right? If you don't agree, probably stupid, because I actually am terrible at reading. Teachers say I have a 10th grade reading level. That's a fucking lie, most likely. You see these eyes? Most likely not. But apparently, they're shit. Because I can't read a fucking book. With the smallest print in the fucking world. It's not that they're shit, it's just I can't read. I mean, I can read, it's just... I can't read, it's just... I'm gonna stop fucking talking, I'm gonna go back to the book. What's this? What's in my book? Was that the walls creaking, or did I just hear someone knock on my door? Is the wind that strong? Because I don't hear anything. Oh well. Oh. Okay, guys, I've changed my mind. We are going to be reading one chapter every video. You know what that means? 17 videos on one book. This is going to be depressing for me, because I do not have patience. I have the time, but I just don't have the patience, to be honest. Mr. Dursley tried to act normally. When Dudley had been put to bed, he went into the living room and time to catch the last report on the evening news. And finally, bird watchers everywhere have reported that our nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night and are hardly ever seen in daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. The newscaster allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious. And now, over to Jim McGuffin. Jim McGuffin, that's a legendary name if I've ever heard one. With the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls today, Jim? Wilted, said the weatherman. I don't know about that, but it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire, and Dundee have been phoning to tell me that instead of rain I promised yesterday, they have had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire night early. And it's not until next week, folks. But I can promise a wet night tonight. Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair. Shooting stars all over Britain, owls flying in daylight, mysterious people in cloaks all over the place, and a whisper about the Potters. Mrs. Dursley came in the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He'd have to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. Petunia, dear, you haven't heard from your sister lately, have you? As he had expected, Mrs. Dursley looked shocked and angry. After all, they normally pretended she didn't have a sister. No, she said softly. Why? Funny stuff on the news, Mr. Mr. Dursley mumbled. Owls, shooting stars. I just gave him the newscaster voice. I'm a dumb. How dare you tell me 20% left is on my phone? Fuck you! Did it stop my recording just to tell me that? How long has that been up there? I probably didn't fucking do that. If it did, I'm gonna be fucking pissed. I'm probably gonna kill someone. Funny stuff on the news, Mr. Dursley mumbled. Owls, shooting stars, and there were a lot of funny-looking people in that town today. So? Snapped Mrs. Dursley. Well, I just thought maybe it was something to do with, her crowd. Mrs. Dursley sipped her tea, though through pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whether he dared tell her he had heard the name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Instead, he said, as casually as he could, their son. He'd be about Dudley's age now, wouldn't he? I suppose so, said Mrs. Dursley stiffly. What's his name again? Howard, isn't it? Harry! Nasty common name if you ask me. Oh, yes, said Mr. Dursley, his heart sinking horribly. Yes, I quite agree. He didn't say another word on the subject as they went upstairs to bed. While Mrs. Dursley was in the bathroom, Mr. Dursley... Oh, my God. I say their name and it just sounds... Ugh, fuck. I think I mispronounced their name. Did I? Maybe. Mr. Dursley wondered whether he dated... Fuck! Okay. He didn't... While Mrs. Dursley was in the bathroom, Mr. Dursley, his heart... Oh, wait, no. Crept to the bedroom window and peered down into the front gate. Front garden, not front gate. Front garden. The cat was still there. It was staring down Pivot Drive as though it was waiting for something. Was he imagining things? Could it all this have some... Could all this have anything to do? Okay, let me just turn the page. Okay, I don't know why I did that, but fuck. With the Potters. If it did, if it got out that they were related to a pair of, well, he didn't think he could bear it. The Dursleys had gotten to bed. Mrs. Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake, turning it all over in his mind. His last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there's no reason for them to come near him and Mrs. Dursley. The Potters knew very well what he and Petunia thought about them and their kind. He couldn't see how he and Petunia could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and turned over. It couldn't affect them. How very wrong he was. Okay, guys, I'm going to take a quick break. So you're just going to be staring at a blank screen for a little bit with just this. So, yeah. When I get back, just keep double tapping your screen, or if you're on a computer, just keep sliding until you see me back into the picture. Yeah. Woo, I need to take a fucking breath. I mean, you can still hear me, it's just this fucking mask. It's not that I think masks stop you from being able to breathe. It's just the fact that this thing's covered my entire face and basically almost completely concealed. Also, I need to blow my nose. Oh no. Oh no, please don't. That was delicious. Oh my god. No, please. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to, please. Ah! Yeah, I forgot to blow my nose. Where the fuck did I put the book? Okay. Let's see, where did I leave off? How very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the cat on the wall outside was showing no signs of sleepiness. It was sitting... Fucking popcorn. Oh my goddamn... No, stop. It was sitting as still as a statue. It was sitting as still as a statue. Its eyes fixed unblinkingly onto the far corner of Privet Drive. It didn't so much as quiver when a car door slammed on the next street, nor when 2 owls swept overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the cat moved at all. A man appeared on the corner the cat had been watching. Appeared so suddenly and silently you thought he was just popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched and its eyes narrowed. Nothing like this man had ever been seen on Privet Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old. Judging by the silver of his hair and beard, which were long enough to tuck into his belt, he was wearing long robes, a purple cloak that swept the ground, and high-heeled, buckled boots. I would not be a good fucking teacher to be reading to kids. I'd lose my shit because I have zero patience. It didn't so much as quiver when a car door... I already read that. He was wearing long robes, a purple cloak that swept to the ground, and high-heeled, buckled boots. His blue eyes were light, bright, and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles, and his nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This man's name was Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realize that he just arrived in the street where everything from his name and his boots was unwelcome. He was busy rummaging in his cloak looking for something, but he did not seem to realize he was being watched, because he looked up suddenly at the cat, which was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. He chuckled and muttered, I should have known. He found what he was looking for in his inside pocket. It seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open, held it up in the air, and clicked it. The nearest street line went out with a little pop. Clicked it again. The next street light flickered into darkness. 12 times he clicked that put-outer. The put-outer? That's the latest name I've ever heard. Until the only lights left on the whole street were 2 tiny pinpricks in the distance. Well, it's not lazy, it's just... Could have just got the light exterminator, which wouldn't make really sense. But the put-outer, you could have just put something more enthusiastic. The put-outer sounds like something a 5-year-old would come up with. I don't know if you started making this book when you were 5 years old. I'm sorry if you did and it offends you. But... put-outer? Really? You could have thought of anything and you decided to put-outer? I'm disappointed. I am very disappointed, J.K. Rowling. At least they didn't mention that in the movies. Never see that thing again, by the way. She probably realized what, the name she just gave the thing. She's like, oh crap, I can't ever put that back in again. That's an embarrassment to the story. The put-outer. Why did I name it that? I could have named it the light, get rid of her. But the put-outer? Really? Oh well. We're done lecturing about put-outer. If anyone looked out of their window now, even beady-eyed Mrs. Dursley they wouldn't be able to see anything that was happening down on the pavement. Dumbledore slipped the put-outer back inside of his cloak and set off down the street towards number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. Cat. I'm getting the R's mixed up with T's and the T's mixed up with R's. How is this happening? He didn't look at it, but after a moment he spoke to it. Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall. He turned to smile at the tabby, but it had gone. Instead, he was smiling at a rather severe-looking woman who was wearing square glasses exactly the shape of the markings the cat had around its eyes. She, too, was wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Her black hair was drawn into a tight bun. She looked distinctly ruffled. How did you know it was me? She asked. My dear Professor, I've never seen a cat sit so stiffly. It would be stiffer if you were sitting on a brick wall all day. You'd be stiff if you are sitting on a brick wall all day, said Professor McGonagall. All day? When you could have been celebrating? I must have passed a dozen feasts and parties on my way here. Professor McGonagall sniffed angrily. Oh yes, everyone's celebrating all right, she said impatiently. You'd think they'd be a bit more careful, but no, even the Muggles have noticed something's going on. It was on the news. She jerked her head back at the Dursleys' dark living room window. I heard it. Flocks of owls, shooting stars. Well, not completely stupid. They were bound to notice something. Shooting stars down in Kent. I'll bet that was Deadliest Diggle. He had never had much sense. You can't blame him, said Dumbledore gently. We've had precious little to celebrate for 11 years. I know that, said Professor McGonagall irritably. But that's no reason to lose our heads. People are downright careless. Out on the streets of broad daylight, not even dressed in Muggle clothes, swapping rumors. She threw a sharp sideways glance at Dumbledore here, as though hoping he was going to tell her something, but he didn't. So she went on. A fine thing it would be if on the very day you-know-who disappeared at last, the Mongols found out about us. I suppose he really has gone, Dumbledore. It certainly seems so, said Dumbledore. We have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a lemon drop? A what? A lemon drop? They're a kind of Muggle sweet that I'm rather fond of. No, thank you, said Professor McGonagall coldly, as though she didn't know this was the moment for lemon drops. As I say, even if you-know-who is gone... As I say, even if you-know-who is gone... My dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself... As I say, even if you-know-who is gone... My dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name. All this you-know-who nonsense. For 11 years I've been trying to persuade people they call him by his proper name, Voldemort. Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking 2 lemon drops, seemed to not to notice. It all gets so confusing if we keep saying you-know-who. I've never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name. I know you haven't, said Professor McGonagall, sounding half exasperated, half admiring. But you're different. Everyone knows you're the only one Oh, all right, Voldemort was frightened of. You flatter me, said Dumbledore calmly. Voldemort had powers I will never have. Only because you're too, noble to use them. It's lucky it's dark. I haven't blushed so much since Madame Pomfrey told me she liked my new earmuffs. Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, The owls are nothing next to rumors that are flying around. You know what everyone's saying about why he's disappeared and what's finally stopped him? It seems... That's it, I'm not doing the voice anymore. So, oh God, don't tell me I have your battery, 10%. I will end the video here, guys. We will continue it next episode, but my phone needs charging. I will be doing my first episode on Fallout 4 Cheats playthrough. Sure, it may not be as, fun, but that doesn't matter speaking. The reason I do cheats is so I can build epic bases. And also get places I'm probably never going to get in my normal playthrough. Also, bye! Have a beautiful time. You guys are the best, and fuck you.